Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, Iran. Watch this media space. The election's coming, and journalists are being arrested. The former Russian Republic of Georgia, where the loyalties of television channels change depending on where the power lies. The new press freedom rankings are out. Things are getting better in Myanmar and worse in Somalia. And the Facebook focus group that explains a few things.
Can you make a policy where anything I post you now own?
Our web video of the week. The presidential election in Iran is now 5 months away, and the regime appears to be preparing for the vote by moving against journalists. Over the past week, at least 14 reporters have been arrested. They worked for 7 different news organizations, but the implication is they also did some work for foreign media outlets the government calls anti-revolutionary. We've reported before on Iran, accusing organizations like Voice of America and the BBC's Persian service of working with American and British intelligence. And cracking down on the media is not limited to muzzling those Iranians pushing for reform. 6 months ago, we looked at President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's press advisor, Ali Akbar Javanfekir, who was also imprisoned for criticizing the government. That story exposed the power struggle playing out at the upper echelons of the government. This past week, a conservative news website, Tabnak, was taken offline, another sign of infighting within Iran's conservative ranks, another indication that the range of voices tolerated by this regime is growing smaller by the day. Our starting point this week is Tehran. Our story, the new red lines that demarcate the no-go zones for Iranian journalism.
The Iranian government is trying to intimidate Iranian journalists.
It's a way of warning other journalists in Iran to watch the red lines of the authorities.
The regime is also afraid of the people who are close to the government.
What they expect is a media that will stay in line, fall in line, and hold the line.
Hanging over the Iran media story like a dark cloud of context is the specter of 2009. The demonstrations that followed that election, the allegations never proven that it was stolen, shook the country and set the social media template for the Arab Spring that was still to come. The 2013 presidential election is not until June, but it is crystal clear that things are different this time round.
In years past, we've seen the Iranian government loosen up its restrictions on the media, loosen up its restrictions on the press, both foreign journalists and domestic journalists, prior to an Iranian election, in an effort to create higher turnout, which they always felt granted or bestowed a certain level of legitimacy for the Islamic Republic. They're doing the exact opposite this time.
A few days ago, a few Iranian journalists met with former President Hashemi Rafsanjani, the Ayatollah's main rival inside the country. One of the messages that they wanted to send by arresting this group of people was to intimidate journalists who may support Rafsanjani.
And we know also that a couple of weeks ago, the revolutionary prosecutor of Tehran said some of the journalists in Tehran were working hand in glove, these are his words, hand in glove with the foreign media.
The
government's expectation of the media will be to report, to act as journalists and report on the politics that's going on. The concern the government will have is when reporting changes into trying to undermine, if not overthrow, the system or advocate for the system's overthrow. That's the red line in Iran.
The 14 journalists were arrested over the space of 3 days, starting January 26th. Some were working for reformist newspapers, at least one for a semi-official news agency. But with the arrests coming when they did, after the prosecutor's warning about Iranians working for foreign media, conclusions were drawn.
Iranian authorities are very angry with the coverage of the BBC Persian-speaking media outside Iran, and they think that those media organizations are in contact with a group of journalists in Iran, especially because the people who are working in BBC Persian now used to work in those very agencies and newspapers. So this is why they think they're still connected.
We in the BBC Persian television have been coming under a lot of pressure since 2009. 2009. But this campaign seems to have been stepped up in the last month or two, and we expect this to get even more serious as we get closer to the elections.
In much of the world, the British Broadcasting Corporation enjoys a sterling reputation, not in Iran. In the 1953 coup that deposed a democratically elected prime minister and put the Shah in charge, an overthrow that was engineered in London and Washington, the code word signaling that the coup was on was transmitted over the BBC's Persian radio service. That's no Iranian conspiracy theory. It was confirmed in CIA documents released in 1999 and reported on by the New York Times, among others. The BBC was central to that story. It is part of Iran's recent history, and the country's clerical rulers constantly remind Iranians of that.
The Iranian government has clearly, repeatedly, transparently stated that it sees, and there's objective credibility to this, the Voice of America and the BBC Persian service as propaganda arms, tools of their governments to undermine, if not overthrow, the system inside the Islamic Republic of Iran. So, are the Iranians crazy in their belief that these media, so-called media, but really propaganda tools are working to undermine the government? No, I don't think they're crazy.
If the imprisonment last year of Ali Akbar Javan Fekra, President Ahmadinejad's media advisor, revealed serious divisions within the government, then the blocking last week of a news website, Tabnak, blew that story wide open. Tabnak has been a go-to site for Iranian conservatives, particularly on the economic story and the increasingly touchy issue of the impact of sanctions.
In the past, there wasn't a variety of voices among the conservatives. Now there is this variety of voices among the conservative media. You have Top Nog, you have Bostop, you have Aleph, you have Jahan News, you have Raja News. And it's not only the reformist media who are talking about the impact of sanctions, it's also the conservative media. And that's what is infuriating the regime.
Iran is a country with good historical reasons to be wary of the foreign media. As a result, when Iranians turn on their televisions, they don't know whose story, whose news narrative they can believe. And now, with conservatives in the government turning on their own, it's as though not even the regime knows who in the media it can trust anymore. And the election is still 5 months away.
This is a regime that really cannot face itself in the mirror. And as a result, it's becoming paranoid because it doesn't like what it sees in the mirror. And the media, of course, and the Persian media in specific, is the mirror that they can just look at themselves. The Iranian government are trying to intimidate journalists. As we say in Persian, break the mirror.
Our Global Village voices now on the deteriorating state of journalism in election year Iran.
The media in Iran has always been a place for vibrant political debate in the country. At one point, it had one of the highest daily newspaper circulation rates in the Middle East. But I think it's also important to remember that a number of these newspapers aren't just platforms for political conversations. They're also linked to some of the country's most high-profile political figures. So I think this is about narrowing the sphere of political debate ahead of the elections in June and sending a clear message to political rivals.
The regime is also very sensitive toward BBC Persian and VOA Persian because these two outlets are staffed by a majority of Iranian journalists who recently fled Iran due to repression, and yet they are very familiar voices and faces for the Iranian public. And their alternative reporting and coverage of the domestic affairs in Iran could very much counter the official narrative.
Time now for Listening Post News Bites. In Ukraine, a senior military man has been sentenced to life in prison for the killing of a journalist. On January 29th, General Alexei Pukhach, a former security official, was sentenced in court for the murder of Georgy Gongadze. Gongadze was doing some muckraking journalism for an internet newspaper that he founded called Ukrainskaya Pravda, which means Ukrainian Truth. He vanished back in September of 2000. His body was found 2 months later, beheaded in a forest outside Kiev. Pukhach testified that he had been trying to force Mr. Gongadze to confess to espionage, had not intended to kill him, but accidentally strangled him with a belt in the course of the interrogation. Pukhach's lawyer told the court that he thought that the general received his orders to kill the journalist from the highest political levels of the government. Gongadze's death set off protests at the time against the president, Leonid Kuchma. The Twitter account of the Somalia-based militant group Al-Shabaab has been suspended after the posting of some vitriolic and inflammatory tweets. Al-Shabaab seeks to impose Sharia law in the region and has raked up thousands of followers since going on Twitter 2 years ago. It used the microblogging site to claim responsibility for militant attacks, issue threats, and connect with the international media. In one tweet, Al-Shabaab announced the execution of a captive French agent after a mission to rescue him failed. It also said that it would kill several Kenyan journalists if the government in Nairobi failed to release certain prisoners held in Kenyan jails. It is not clear which tweet or tweets in particular caused the organization's account to be suspended, since Twitter has not commented on this. However, Al-Shabaab said in an interview with Reuters they shut it down because our account overpowered all the Christians' mass media, and they could not tolerate the grief and the failure of the Christians we always displayed online. Al-Shabaab has been blamed for most of the 18 media fatalities last year that made Somalia the most dangerous African country from which to report. In the latest Press Freedom Index, just released by Reporters Without Borders, Somalia dropped 11 places to 175th. That's 5th from the bottom. One country moving the other way in that index on press freedom is Myanmar, formerly known as Burma. Myanmar has risen 18 places to 151st. That is primarily because the new democratically elected government has started stripping away the media restrictions imposed by the former military rulers. And according to a report published in the state-run New Light of Myanmar, the government has now closed the country's press censorship board. The board has grown obsolete since the authorities abolished the rule that said that journalists had to send in their copy prior to publication. But this announcement makes that official. All of this follows a declaration late last year that cleared the way for private newspapers to be made available starting in April. That's the first time that's happened in 50 years. Media watchers have welcomed the news, but they're still cautious. They want the changes enshrined in legislation, and the new media law that the government promised by the end of 2012 has yet to materialize. Rupert Murdoch, the chairman of News Corp International, is usually an uncompromising man. He's not known for being overly apologetic. Then one of his newspapers, the UK Sunday Times, produced this political cartoon of the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, building a wall out of the body parts of Palestinians. Pro-Israel organizations went after the Sunday Times over the cartoon, calling it blood libel imagery reminiscent of the worst kind of anti-Semitic propaganda. And the timing was terrible. The cartoon came out on the day that Israelis annually mark the World War II Holocaust. Taking to Twitter, Murdoch said of the cartoonist, Gerald Scarfe has never reflected the opinions of the Sunday Times. Nevertheless, we owe major apology for a grotesque, offensive cartoon. A few years back, we spent some time tracking the battle over the media space in Georgia, the former Russian Republic in the Caucasus. That story has since moved on. In parliamentary elections 5 months ago, President Mikhail Saakashvili's United National Movement was defeated by the new Georgian Dream coalition led by billionaire Bidzina Ivanishvili. Georgia experienced its first democratic transition of power, a bitter political struggle that was played out on the country's television screens. During the election, the news programs that Georgians chose to watch could well have affected the votes they cast. TV channels were that partisan. Since the vote, some channels have changed hands. The ownership landscape is being redrawn. However, the partisanship behind the journalism remains. The Listening Post's Flo Phillips now on the political players, their media playthings, and the channels that are still far too close to those who hold power in Georgia.
The television tower. It dominates the skyline of Georgia's capital city and commands its airwaves. The politicians jostling for control know its power.
Every politician, every statement tries to have an influence on media. Very often it's used as a political tool.
Politicians subsidize them in order to use them as tools to further their political careers and ambitions.
It doesn't matter if you were a ruling party or an oppositional leader, you would have ambitions to control media anyway here in Georgia. It's always been the case.
In the run-up to last October's election, the battle lines were drawn and various media outlets took sides. In one corner, President Mikhail Saakashvili, leader of the United National Movement, former hero of the 2003 Rose Revolution, backed by Georgia's public broadcaster and two major private channels, Imedi and Rustavi 2. In the other corner, Bidzina Ivanishvili, the billionaire founder of the Georgia Dream Coalition, whose family now owns 4 media outlets. The biggest one, TV9, belongs to his wife. Tamar Ruhadze was the head of the channel's newsroom. She resigned at the end of last year.
Channel 9 is owned by Ivanishvili's wife. This is perfectly legal according to Georgian law, but naturally it has created a certain discomfort.
The Ivanishvili family still owns a total of 4 TV channels. 3 of them provide current affairs content. They're all somewhat small TV channels, but there hasn't been an effort yet from the family of the Prime Minister to distance themselves from these assets.
The power of television and one piece of video was revealed last September, just before the general election. 2 pro-Ivanishvili TV stations, TV9 and Maestro, broadcast a clip purporting to show torture and sexual abuse at a Tbilisi prison under President Saakashvili's rule. It had an impact.
There's speculation that the release of these videos was strategically timed just a week ahead of the elections to maximize the impact on the elections. The videos, I think, resulted in a lot of people who were undecided to support Ivanishvili and to vote against the government, to vote for political change. I think they were a game changer in these elections.
I don't know what would have happened if these videos were never shown, but I can assure you that the footage played a huge role. It was probably the final straw.
This was one of the main reasons why the elections ended the way they ended. I think it's still too early to kind of discuss what was really going on. We had rumors that some of the shots may be fake. You have all these questions and you don't have answers to them still.
Imedi TV, the private channel that was pro-Saakashvili, said that the prison video may have been staged. But now that that same video has helped bring Ivanishvili to power, it looks as though Imedi is changing sides, not for the first time. Imedi has had a back-and-forth history. When it began broadcasting in 2003, the channel was on Saakashvili's side, but fell out with him in 2007. Saakashvili security forces raided the channel while it was on air, turned out the lights, turned off the cameras. It then got transferred back to Saakashvili supporters under complicated and dubious circumstances. But no sooner had Ivanishvili won the October election, when it was announced that Imedi was changing hands once again.
In the past, the public was not given any information about Imedi's change in ownership. Now, too, there are questions. We just woke up one day to discover Imedi had new owners. Naturally, the public, as well as us journalists, want to know under what conditions and circumstances all this has happened, and why they decided to return it today, of all days.
We have a whole new team now. Previously, there was a very different editorial policy at Imedi, and unfortunately, Georgian viewers were exposed to propaganda. We now have a long way to go to regain trust and rebuild ratings. There are very high expectations about the reorganization of this channel, and we feel a huge responsibility for it.
The constant jostling for power at Imedi goes to the heart of the problem of journalism in Georgia. The new Prime Minister is now under pressure to transfer his channel, TV9, to a third party to give it more independence, but that hasn't happened yet. And here's the bigger problem. In countries like Georgia, with a population of around 4 million, advertising revenues are small. No one gets into the TV business to make money, so TV is the preserve of the rich. and wealthy Georgians are using their money to gain influence, even to gain power.
From my own experience, politicians are the worst enemies of journalism. I don't think it's good for our country that Ivanishvili's family owns a TV company. And in general, I think it's very bad that politicians have their own TV stations. But I do think we have to go through this stage.
You would have pro-governmental TV station and you would have oppositional TV station. There was nothing in the middle. There was not such thing that independent TV channel. When you have these particular TV channels here in Georgia where market is too small and it's Georgian spoken and you only have 4 million of people who are listening to you because, you know, the rest of the world doesn't just understand it. And it's really hard to stay in the middle because when you are in the middle, Georgians just don't watch you.
I think many of the best media outlets and some of the best journalism in Georgia, no matter if it's on TV or in print or online, is funded by international donors. There's not much appreciation yet among the public how important investigative and independent reporting is.
These issues around independence, financial sustainability, or even journalistic professionalism need to be put in context. In the last 10 years, Georgia has been through a revolution, suffered endemic corruption, and fought a brief war with Russia. But despite all the hardship, it still seems to have more freedom of expression than most of its neighbours in the Caucasus. The battle to control the airwaves still rages on. Players continue to change sides. The next few months will show if the rules can change, and another battle in Georgia can finally be over.
Right now, our media is at the same stage of development as our society. If society progresses, so too will the media.
Georgian media is in the middle of a struggle. It's trying to become both more professional and more independent.
This is #1 test for Bidzina Ivanishvili's government, actually. And it's up to them how they're going to pass this test.
More Global Village Voices now on the changes in television journalism in Georgia.
The media played an important role in this very surprising election result, but it's possible also that we will now see just a kind of reversal of the roles, where you have Prime Minister Ivanishvili taking over the role that Saakashvili had before, and kind of harnessing the national TV channels for his own use.
The basic problems facing the Georgian media remain the same, such as pressure on journalists to adhere to a strict political agenda, limited financing for independent media, and a low level of journalistic skills. Georgians themselves are great consumers of information, but the vast majority of them depend on national television stations. While there are very talented investigative journalists in Georgia, they have very few places to publish their work.
Finally, media organizations love to use focus groups in their audience research, the theory being that the insights and feedback of a small group of people will give them a better idea of what larger audiences are looking for. And nobody has a bigger media audience than Facebook, 1 billion users. This next viral video was produced by a website called ucbcomedy.com. The premise that many of the most annoying things that we see on Facebook and some of the scary privacy issues are not part of Facebook's grand design, and they are not user-generated problems. They're generated by an exceptionally stupid focus group. Our web video of the week is at 400,000 hits and counting. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.
Hello, and thank you for coming out for this focus group. We really want to get feedback on your experience using Facebook. Maybe get some suggestions on how we can improve the site, okay? Yes?
Hi, can I get more invites? I mean, I get a lot now, but I could really use more.
More invites. Yeah, I can do, sure. Yeah.
Can I see when, like, a coworker comments on the photo of someone I don't really know at all? You know, like a complete stranger.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, okay.
I just read a great article about how Scarlett Johansson doesn't have a butt double. And I think all my Facebook friends would like to know that I did that.
Yes.
Yeah.
When I'm inviting people to an event, there's no invite all button, so I have to manually invite every single person.
Right.
Yeah, that's cool. I love doing that.
Oh, yeah. Wonderful. Okay.
Can you make a policy where anything I post you now own?
Like photos and stuff?
Yes, all those things. Thank you for holding on to those.
Absolutely. And you know what? We'll make sure to let you know anytime we're updating our policies or updating our privacy settings.
No, don't do that.
Wow, okay, that's way easier.
Too much.
This is great.
Keep shut of it. That's gross.
Yes.
A lot of my personal information is on there. I was thinking maybe you could sell it and make a buck.
That's a great idea. Yeah. Wonderful. Okay.